Is the problem of evil sound? That's what we are debating. Glad you are here, and we are starting right now. So, glad to have you here, everybody. Very stoked for this special debate, as we will basically be debating the problem of evil, whether or not it is sound. And this is, as most people prefer, an informal discussion. So the good thing about that is we're going to give brief introductions and let the debaters go from there. So if you have questions during the debate, just submit those questions in the comments with an @ModernDayDebate at the start, and that'll let me know that you're actually asking the question for me rather than somebody that you're debating in the audience. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our debaters. We have a theist guest and an atheist guest. And first we'll start with our theist guest. RC Apologist has been doing this for a long time, and we're stoked to have him back. I'm very glad to have you here. Do you want to share about what's going on at your channel, RC?
Well, just that we're currently trying to... By the way, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, yeah, just making sure. Yeah, we're currently trying to make sure get some content out there. We're doing live streams every Friday, except for this particular one because it's, well, the debate. And then, of course, we're starting to get back on original content being made. Got already a script recorded and going to be working on another one dealing with numbers 31 pretty soon. So just continuing to do well and study to help get that content out there to help grow the body of Christ.
Rad. Well, I'm stoked to hear it. We're glad to have you back. And for those of you who want to check out his content, it is linked in the description below. We highly encourage you to check out both debaters' content or links in the description. That way, even if you don't agree, hey, at least you got their view straight from the horse's mouth. So, TJump, glad to have you back. Been here a number of times already. And what's going on at your channel? Heard you just surpassed the big 300 mark. Excellent. Excited for you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure as always. I'm TJump. I like doing debates. I debate all kinds of stuff, mostly religion and the arguments for and against the existence of God.
You bet. Well, glad to have you here. And with that, we're not going to waste any time, folks. So excited that both of the debaters are here. We're getting started right now. So I will set the timer. We could maybe do like roughly 45 minutes and then 15 minutes of Q&A. So glad to have you both here, and the floor is yours.
All right, I'll start with my introduction. The problem of suffering is that if there is an all-good, all-powerful God, it would have created the best of all possible worlds for all possible wills. And that is a world where every individual has sovereignty over themselves, and it is physically impossible for anyone, including God, to force anyone else, to do something they do not voluntarily consent to doing. Anything less than this is by definition slavery and by definition immoral. So we clearly do not live in such a world. Therefore, either God is evil because he has forced us into slavery to his will, or God is not powerful enough to create the best possible world, which is unlikely because we are almost at the technological point where we can do so, or God doesn't exist and an impersonal necessary thing that created the universe does, kind of like pantheism. We know this to be the case because, as theists argue, there is an objective basis of morality grounded in our moral intuitions and moral progress. So if we grant this evidence as indicative of an objective morality, the objective moral standard is a world where every individual has sovereignty over themselves, and it is physically impossible for anyone, including God, to force another to do something else they don't voluntarily consent to doing. So, given objective morality, there is no all-good, all-powerful God, because if it existed, it would have created the best of all possible worlds, and we clearly do not live in such a world. So maybe there is some objection that maybe there is some sufficient reason that God could create a world without suffering. This objection does not work because any potential benefit of a God-designed world can be achieved and improved upon in the best possible world simply by making it optional. In the best possible world, it would be an option to live in a God-designed world exactly like this one with all of its benefits and consequences. The only difference is that those who do not wish to live in such a world can simply choose to go to their own universe of their own choosing. And this option is clearly morally superior in every respect, therefore God has no possible excuse. Another way to demonstrate there is no excuse is to ask, would that make it okay to make someone else slaves? Like if Adam ate an apple, does that make it okay to put another group of people in slavery if they ate an apple? Clearly not. Or if Adam and Eve chose to live in a world with suffering, would that make it okay to enslave their children? Also clearly not. So we can just ask the question, would whatever excuse God have make it okay or justifiable to make other human beings slaves? And the answer is pretty much always going to be no, because nothing justifies slavery. So to conclude, if there was an all-good, all-powerful God, it would have created the best of all possible worlds. We clearly don't live in such a world. We are almost technologically to the point where we can create such a world, so God has no excuse. Therefore, there is no all-good, all-powerful God, and it is far more likely that the universe was created by something like pantheism, which is impersonal.
You bet. Well, the floor is yours now, RC.
All right. Well, obviously, I take the position that the problem of evil exists, but the problem can be solved based on the fact that with evil existing, we know that we can determine something, first of all, is morally right and morally wrong, because everyone, as objective morality states, knows what is right and wrong. And for this particular reason of why I affirm this would be the issue of what God has revealed in his word, and that is Romans chapter 2, verse 14 to 15, as it is stated in the Christian Standard Bible translation. So when Gentiles who do not by nature have the law do what the law demands. So it's saying that they don't have the written law down, but they do what the law demands. They are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. Their consciences confirm this. Their competing thoughts either accuse or even excuse them. So when it comes to this particular issue, about the problem of evil and the issue of morality, everyone knows right and wrong exists, and that's where I'm going with the sense of objective moral values and objective morality, and where our source of that comes from is that we get this from God, who has written the law in our hearts, not just simply to the Jews, but even to the Gentiles that are the non-Jews. Now, concerning the actual problem itself, that is, that if things, exist that are evil, for example, hurricanes, fires, murder, rape, and all these things, then the question becomes, how could a God, allow this to happen? Well, the issue is that every single thing that I believe occurs in the universe, even down to the microscopic details, has been ordained by God for a purpose. That it's not just some blind, meaningless, guideless process of randomness, but rather that everything that occurs happens with a purpose to the very end that will glorify God, as well as to, in other instances, redeem his people. For example, the wickedness of Jesus being crucified on the cross being an ordained event that was truly evil, yet was ordained for the sake of the atonement of sinners, so that they would be saved and redeemed through his Son. Now, people may try to point out the issue of what kind of goods could come from evil, and that's the whole thing I think I might want to get into later on. As John Frame, a philosopher and theologian, notes in his book on systematic theology, pages 289 to 290, he says the following, quote, "Some have argued that the possibility of evil is necessary for an orderly universe. An orderly universe, in this view, is a universe governed predictably by natural law, but natural laws are impersonal. The law of gravity, for example, takes no account of persons. If someone jumps from a high cliff, he will be hurt. Whether he is righteous or wicked, if God miraculously protected everybody for those otherwise righteous who took foolish chances, it would be difficult to predict the events of nature scientifically. So if we are to have an orderly, predictable universe, so the argument goes, we must be willing to accept a certain amount of pain and suffering." So regarding that, even the issue of evolution could be something that could be, as Kent Hovind tries saying, describes it as an evil process, but because you have suffering and death being involved there, we can still quite clearly look at it and say that there's still some good that comes out of it, among it being us human beings that are resulted from it, as well as the beauty of creation of animals and other kinds of species that we can look and have an awe magnificent over. But there was suffering, there was death that was involved through that was able to bring about a good. So the issue is then, how can the atheist, regardless of if he affirms objective morality or not, ultimately justify this without ultimately trying to go back to what is God. And that's what I think is the problem with my opponent, is that while he claims that he is trying to hold to some different atheistic morality, concept of objective morality, he is in reality actually getting his morality from God. So that is my introduction.
You bet.
All right, cool. So I'll just continue from there. So I ground morality in not in theism but in pantheism, just an eternal, all-powerful nature as an undiscovered law of nature. And I agree that there is an objective morality, and that objective morality indicates the theistic God is clearly immoral. So even if I grant that the entire universe has a purpose, if God forced me to be a part of his purpose without my consent or my choosing my own purpose, that is by definition slavery and by definition immoral. And I can grant everything you said and just say, yep, that should all be an option, that we can choose to live in a universe like that designed by God. But it would be morally superior if we could choose to opt out and go to our own universe. I don't care if that universe is predictable scientifically or not. It's just morally superior if I would have the option to go to one of my own design rather than to be forced against my will to be in this one, which is, again, by definition slavery and by definition immoral.
Okay. So I do want to go over some of the other things you said along with what you just said there. I mean, because you said that it is wrong for God that makes him evil because he didn't create the best of all possible worlds, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what determines something to be the best?
Well, I agree with the theist argument that we have our moral intuitions and moral progress as indicative of an objective morality. So I agree there is an objective morality. I agree our moral intuitions and our moral progress indicate that objective morality. And the objective morality indicated by those things is that the most moral world is one where no being it's physically impossible to force one being to do something they don't voluntarily agree to do.
Right, but I don't think that answers my question on what determines something to be the best, as your word is the best.
It's just the objective moral standard. I can say the objective moral standard is grounded in pantheism rather than theism.
Okay, so in order for something to be the best, it has to be based on some sort of moral basis?
Yes, an objective moral basis.
So like when Hitler, for example, is considered, well, not a righteous man, considered, at least as far as I've heard in speech classes in college, the greatest speech giver of all time because he is able to convince an entire nation to go through and follow through with his ideas of genocide towards the Jewish race. But that you and I would agree that that's not a moral thing. Would therefore they be wrong in saying he's the best speech giver with that regard?
Being the best speech giver has nothing to do with being the best moral anything.
Okay, but the issue was just determining what is how do we know something is the best, period.
So again, I'm just using the word best to mean moral, so it's the most moral.
Okay. So in that context, it wouldn't have anything to do with moral.
No, it would.
Okay.
My world is just the definition of objective morality is the basis being a world that has no involuntary imposition of will. It's grounded in pantheism as opposed to theism. So it's the exact same thing as your morality. It's objective in the exact same sense as your theistic morality.
Okay, and what is the source then of this objective morality? In
pantheism.
Right.
I would just say it's like an undiscovered super law of nature.
So it's an undiscovered super law. So if it's an undiscovered super law, how do you know it's a super law?
A law is just something that describes some part of nature that some interactions that nature does. So a law isn't a physical thing, but we're here to discuss the problem of evil, not the problem of can morality be objective on a different worldview. So just grant that for the sake of argument. Let's say there can be objective morality in other different systems.
Right.
And go to the problem of evil.
Right, but the issue I think as well is the problem. If we're going to say the problem of evil, then because I think was the thesis is the problem of evil is sound, then likewise you two would have that issue about the problem of evil, since evil obviously exists. Now we just have to figure out how to solve it. And I think even in your position, there's still problems with it.
Well, mine is impersonal, so mine doesn't care enough or hasn't done a consciousness to try and make the world good.
Okay. So then
yours is conscious and has intentionality, so it would deliberately want to make the world objectively moral.
So you believe that, in my view, God's wanting to make the entire world perfectly moral?
If it was by definition all good, that would be a necessary condition, yes.
And based on what? Is that the
The
case?
objective standard of morality indicated by the evidence of moral intuition and moral progress.
Okay. So, and how do you know that what's morally right in that regards then about that? Like, how can you
I'm agreeing, yes, that we have reason to believe there is an objective morality, and those reasons are moral intuition and moral progress. So I'm
Okay.
agreeing with your grounds of our objective morality, that we have a reason to believe there is such a thing.
Right, and I understand that you've said that, but the issue is how do you know that this certain specific thing, for example, like you mentioned slavery, how do you know for a fact that that is objectively wrong?
Again, the same evidence that the theists are using, they say we have evidence of an objective morality, which is our moral intuitions and our moral progress. And our moral intuitions and our moral progress indicate this to be objectively immoral.
Right, but you said that for yours, it's an undiscovered thing. You're just, so at that point, y'all haven't discovered it, but you're saying it's there, that this old thing that is objective of morality and that we all have this, but how do you, can you yourself demonstrate within your own worldview about that?
I think you're confusing epistemology and ontology. Like, Newton described the laws of physics without actually knowing what gravity was. He didn't discover gravity, he just described what it did. So I'm doing the same thing here. We have our moral intuition or moral progress, which indicates an objective morality, and I'm saying that can be grounded in pantheism as opposed to theism.
Okay, so it can be grounded in pantheism as opposed to theism. What makes then theism an error on this problem compared to pantheism?
Based on our understanding of morality, objective morality through moral intuition and moral progress, it indicates that slavery is immoral. And based on the description in the Bible, God, if he created the world as it is, has forced us into slavery, which is immoral. So God couldn't be all good if he created the world like this.
Okay, so you're not saying necessarily the issue of other issues, like, for example, the transatlantic slave trade. You're just talking about, like, in terms of, like, where we're at right now in the world that you're identifying that as slavery.
I think so. I'm not sure I understood your question.
Like, because if I'm not misunderstood, whenever you especially went on in your other point, you said that, you know, if he's kind of holding us against our will or something, then that's by definition putting us in slavery, and therefore it's slavery, and therefore it's wrong.
Right. So if there was an all-good, all-powerful God, he would have given us the option to go to our own universe, and we would have had the option not to be in this immoral universe. I don't currently have the option to leave this immoral universe and go to my own. Therefore, I am currently enslaved in this universe. There are certain definitions of slavery and the points that qualify it I can tell you about. One of them is the restriction of the freedom of movement. I am restricted of the freedom to move to my own universe because I'm trapped or was forced against my will to be in this universe. So that would be slavery.
Okay, so by that logic, so that you're only limited to that, just because you're limited to this universe, then by definition that is slavery.
If I was put here against my will, yes.
Okay, if you were put there against your will. Okay. So then, what about an issue where, let's say some kid gets adopted, and parents, adopt him, and the kid just, being spoiled and just being rebellious, just wants to try to leave out of there and says can't, because of course the laws is that he isn't able to make those kinds of decisions unless there's abuse, which there is none going on. Would that then be considered slavery for the kid, since he has no choice or option in the matter to switch houses at that point, especially since there is no sufficient cause, as I explained in that analogy? Would that be considered slavery?
No, because we have pragmatic limitations in this world. We impose limitations on people against their will in order to prevent greater limitations that would be imposed by nature. So because we have pragmatic limitations and we aren't all-powerful and can't create universes, we have to apply limitations. God doesn't have that excuse.
Okay. So the issue is that we're considered slaves because of this, I of course would disagree, and I don't see how you would come to that conclusion, which I think is a bit of a non sequitur in that regard, to that we're slaves in this world. Because, go ahead.
So if I was forced to live in this world without my consent and I cannot voluntarily leave, that is the definition of slavery.
Okay. So let's grant that. Is there anything then wrong with living in this world?
Only if it's not consensual. You can choose to live in this world, that's totally fine. But if you're forced to live here against your will, that's what's immoral.
Okay. But are you unhappy with that?
Unhappy with being
Living in
forced
this
to live here
world?
against my will?
Living in
Yes.
this world, is there like anything that's causing you to want to get out of here?
Yes, lots of things. Death
Okay.
and pain and cancer and suffering, all kinds of things.
Okay. And so you think that if there was a world void of death, cancer, and suffering, you think that that would just remove any problems whatsoever?
No, the point isn't to remove problems. The point is it has to be voluntary. So I can impose my own problems if I want. As long as they're voluntary, there's no problem there at all. It's only the fact that there are problems imposed on me against my will. That's the problem.
Okay. So it seems then the most part of the problem is that you want to have a choice in which universe you live in.
Yes, I would like to not be forced to live in one universe against my will. That would be very nice.
Okay. So do you know every single bit of detail about this universe?
Our universe or the one I want to live in?
This universe, the one that you're claiming that we're being held in, that's not the best of possibilities.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I don't know everything about it. No.
How much would you, if you were to give a percentage or a scale, how much would you say that you would know about this universe?
0.
0. Okay.
As
So
close to 0 as possible.
So based on you saying that you have 0 possible information containing about this universe, then how do you know that it's not the best of possibilities?
Because we know that objectively, the objective moral standard indicated that anytime you force someone to do something against their consent is objectively immoral. It has nothing to do with the universe. You can change everything about the universe. If God forced me to be in a universe of pure bliss against my will, that is still immoral. So the universe itself is irrelevant to the question. It's only immoral because I was forced into it against my will.
Okay, so then just you being forced to do something in general is wrong.
Yes. It is immoral to force any other human being to do anything without their consent.
Okay, so then just by that standard, that be forcing any individual without consent to do something, like in a particular case, like giving someone a shot to prevent a certain disease, and the person doesn't want that to occur, even though if they don't have it, they will die. Would that be considered then something that is wrong to give them a shot that could save their life, even though they're saying, no, 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 I don't want a shot, even if it's to save my life because I hate needles?
Yes, that would be immoral. It's justified because of the limitations of our world where we have to do one immoral thing to prevent a greater immoral thing. God doesn't have that excuse.
Well, how do you know
But
he
it would
doesn't
be
have that
immoral.
excuse?
Because we are almost technologically to the point where we can make this universe I'm describing. So it can't be argued that God doesn't have the logical option when we can do it.
Okay, so you're saying that we then could do this even though we are, as you identified, are able to and be justified in making, quote, immoral decisions, unquote, for a better good. So, but then at the same time, you're saying that God's is supposedly doing immoral things, but now you're saying he's not justified, even though you have said that you have 0% knowledge about everything about the universe. When I asked you,
Right. So we do immoral things like giving someone a shot against their will. That's still immoral. The fact that it's justified doesn't stop it from being immoral. So if God is doing an immoral thing, he's not all good. He's immoral.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would disagree in how you would define that, of course, and that's where I think the issue is, where we differ on our worldview.
But can I address the second thing you said? Is I don't need to know everything about the universe because we know that we can physically make this other world, which means God must necessarily, unless we're more powerful than he must also be able to do it. And anything that is possible in a God-designed world in this universe is possible in the best possible world. Because it's just you can choose to live in a world exactly like this one. So we don't have to know everything about the universe to know that it's possible to do this.
Right, but at the same
He
time,
has
at that point, then you don't know if maybe there is something that is out there that you aren't aware of that does ultimately make it that kind of case. In the same way that if we know, for example, that the individual needs the shot, maybe there's some kind of same thing with that goes on with God, such as what we see elsewhere within the Bible, where other things like Joseph, for example, being sold into slavery, who then, as a result of that, something that is wrong, was able to be used to then bring about a good because he went over to Egypt where a famine was soon about to happen, and he was able to help them out with that, and then keep people from being starving, and also help Egypt prosper within financial success. So when we have things like that occur, and especially elsewhere within the Bible that talks about, I believe it says that God works all things to for a good. So the issue of, and I can even testify this in myself, of things that I've gone through, that have been through suffering and relatives, that there are times of suffering, there are times of evil that occur, but there is something that does come out of it that we can ultimately say that there is a good. Another example, like I mentioned, the issue about pain. We can know not to do certain things or to steer clear from certain things, and also learn from experience due to the evil known as pain that exists.
All right, so the first point, we can know that that isn't an option, or the first thing you said isn't an option. God can't potentially even have an excuse not to do this, because everything in the best possible world I described is already in the world we have. So it's just multiplying the pieces that already exist. So that isn't an option. The second thing you said is that pain can learn. Pain is also an option in the best possible world. You can experience pain if you want to. It just has to be voluntary. So that's also, you can still experience pain. You can still learn. You can still have every aspect of whatever is in this universe, because living in this universe is an option.
Okay. But I don't think there's a way that you could learn from a lack of pain, since you wouldn't feel anything and it wouldn't have really that much negative repercussions, other than possibly, let's just say, just because we're talking about losing a lack of pain, you'd still like lose a finger, for example, or an arm. So
right, I agree with you. I'm saying pain is possible. Pain is in the best possible world. You can choose to live in a world with pain. You can choose to experience pain. You can choose to experience to learn.
Okay.
So I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. So that's the case then. What about people today who may even affirm objective morality, that says that we must have a world with zero pain, otherwise it's not the best of possible worlds? Then how would you disagree with those individuals? Because you're not the first person I've talked to that is who identifies as an atheist, that's an objective moralist. And that's one of the arguments they have against Christianity, is that pain exists, therefore, this is an evil world that God created.
Then I would say that in my model, the objective moral standard would be to let them go to their own world of their choice without pain. They can choose to live in a world without pain, and the people who want to can choose to live with a world with pain.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we're just allowing people to live in their own worlds.
Yes, that would be the moral standard. Yes.
Would it be possible then for, as a result, that people who wanted to choose their own universe and choose their own world, would this include living with artificial people, or would these be people that are just joining in as well, that are actually people and not just simply like false or fake over a period of time?
Either is possible. Either one is possible. You
okay, so then that still leads to a problem then. What if someone, I guess, I think I already know where you're going to go with that they can, of course, they're able to decide what they want. So you're saying that it's all about choosing, but then how do you know that that's right, that that's morally right?
That's what's indicated by the evidence of our moral intuitions and moral progress.
Okay, and what about someone who doesn't agree with that says otherwise?
Well, I would say the same thing the theist says. They're just wrong.
Okay, so you're saying that they're wrong, and but while we have an answer for that, what is your answer to that?
I would answer the exact same way a theist would. We have an objective morality indicated by moral intuition and moral progress, which indicates this is the right answer and their answer is wrong.
Okay, but what do they just still say that they disagree and you can't demonstrate that?
That's fine. Same thing a theist would do. It's just, okay, you can be wrong.
Okay, so you just simply say that they're wrong without ultimately trying to justify it, unless you had what you said earlier.
I'm not sure I follow your point. Like, people can be wrong. They don't have to believe me. I don't
Okay.
know what you're arguing.
All I was asking was a question. So that being said, let me see what else I had. So you mentioned, so I don't know, maybe I've already mentioned this before, but you used the phrase before of morally superior. So how do we determine, objectively, within our moral intuition that something is morally superior?
Well, I would say that's just what the moral intuition indicates. That's what the point of the moral intuition is that it does indicate one thing is superior to another. That's why
Okay.
it is considered evidence of objective morality, is because it does do that.
Okay. So, you're saying that the moral intuition that we have comes from something,
Yes.
okay? And just to help remind me, what is that something?
I don't know what it is, but my alternative explanation could be an undiscovered law of pantheism that we just don't know about yet. That is a possible source.
Okay, so it's an undiscovered law. Is this undiscovered law material or non-material?
Either one makes no difference.
Okay, either one makes no difference. All right. So if it's either one, let's say it's non-material or you know what? Let's just go with both. So, but it's undiscovered, and you don't know exactly what it is, but you're going to say it's a something super law that's undiscovered.
Yes?
Okay. All right. Just thought I'd just ask that. Okay. So
Just to clarify, it's like Newton discovered the laws of gravity by describing what they did.
but he
before
didn't.
he knew.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And that's the same thing I'm arguing. I'm arguing we can understand objective morality through what it does with our moral intuitions and our moral progress without knowing exactly what it is.
Right.
So we don't it's ontology, but we can still describe that it exists.
Right. Sorry if I ask too much. Sometimes, like your concept is definitely certainly very interesting and new. So that's why I'm just trying to make sure I don't misrepresent you. So forgive me if I ask.
Absolutely, no problem. I totally understand.
Okay. So you mentioned that he is holding you against your will for his will if, and this I think is where my question sort of gets clarified from past responses, if he's making you be in this universe that we live in now.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you forced me against my will and didn't give me an option to go to my own universe, that is slavery. That's immoral.
Okay. So, well, I think I really don't think there's much of a way to resolve the issue, because it seems that you're saying that something is wrong in how we're going about it, about us being put into this universe, even though while there are things that happen, you admit that there are some things that we ourselves, people who you say can do, that aren't omnibenevolent and omnipresent, but we can still make this possible world that is the best of all possible worlds. But while we could do that, we're still justified in making what you have said, immoral decisions. But yet, if God makes something that you state is an immoral decision, even while not having all the knowledge of like what could be considered the justified means, you'll still identify that he is still somehow in the wrong in this issue about the problem of evil.
Right. So from my perspective, we can only do an immoral thing to prevent a greater immoral thing that is caused by nature. So we only have that as an out because we can't design nature. Once we can design nature, once we can make the best of all possible worlds, like what I mean by we almost technologically have the ability to is that we could like upload all our brains to the matrix or something and give ourselves our own universe. We don't have that ability yet, but it is logically possible that we could in the future. And once we do that, then we would no longer have the justification. If we could all go to the matrix, it would no longer be justified to force someone to do something against their will, because we could design nature. And since God can already design nature, he doesn't have that justification in the first place.
Okay. So then what happens towards the end then cannot be justified, basically. That no matter what he has set up, that every single microscopic detail down to the atoms is unjustifiable.
Right. If he forces me to live for his purpose, which I had no say in, that is by definition immoral, regardless of whatever that purpose is.
Okay. So, I don't know. I just don't see how that would be the case, because I think of the same thing when it comes to parenting, getting away from the issue about diseases and all that. That if we are, for example, let's say if a person, makes bad grades.
You mind if I jump in here? So let's say you discipline a kid to stop them from running into the street. That would be a justified immoral action on my viewpoint. It's immoral to discipline the child because you are doing something against their will or without their consent, but it's justified because if you don't do it and they run into the street, they're going to get run over by a car. That's only justifiable because if they run into the street, they're going to get run over by a car. But if we could design nature, like live in the Matrix or something, and cars would just pass through you like you're a ghost, then there would be no justification for disciplining the child, because they could run into the street all they want and they would never get hurt. So the only justification we have for disciplining the child is the fact that there is a greater punishment there in the future because we don't have control over nature. If we had control over nature, there would be no justification in disciplining the child ever for anything.
Okay. So, but why is it wrong for the child to run into the street where the traffic is coming, in your view?
It's not. It's not.
Okay, so
it's
the
not
child.
Wrong at all. It's the fact that they're going to get hit by the car. That's what's wrong. Their will is going to be imposed upon by the car, and that's wrong.
Okay. So then, as I was trying to point out, because I wasn't trying to point out the issue of whether or not if he gets killed or not, because I think that was the issue I was trying to avoid concerning that particular type of analogy. The issue was that if a kid, makes bad grades, and does not improve upon that, and just continues to, lack more knowledge and does not wish to study further, and therefore doesn't gain or increase the IQ. But the parents, in order to help with this, remove some basically distractions such as no video games or no TV, which imposes on certain actions that the child would do. So for the sake that he then also is forced to have to study. So again, nothing physical is occurring within this individual, and doesn't seem to be that really much anything with nature, just simply the issue of what's going on specifically with the individual and the concept of knowledge. Is that wrong, what they did, that can be considered justifiable?
Yes, that would be the exact same in my worldview. The reason that they are justified in that case is to try and make their kid smarter so that he can live in the world. You need to get a job to be able to buy food and to support a family and to live in the world. Now, if that wasn't a requirement and you didn't have to get a job and you didn't have to work for a living, then, and you could just do whatever you wanted to in your own universe, then it would no longer be justified to force the child to learn stuff. He should just be able to go around and play video games all he wants. And so the only reason it's justified to punish him for not learning that stuff is because to prevent the greater imposition on his will of being homeless, essentially.
Okay, but what if even...
That would be the exact same as the car example, from my perspective.
But what if at that point he doesn't become homeless, he fails all the whole thing, and he just stays with his parents for the rest of his life? Because I've seen people, and I've actually worked with people where this kind of stuff happens as a caretaker.
I do not follow your analogy. That's fine too, but the goal would be to try and give him the opportunity to succeed in life to some degree. So it's the same justification.
But why is succeeding in life good then? What if this person, by his own decisions and will, doesn't want to succeed in life?
That would be his choice. From my perspective, you have that choice. You have the moral choice to be able to decide that for yourself. But again, the justification comes from the fact that if you don't succeed in life, nature is going to hurt you bad because you're going to be without food, without a home, without all kinds of things. And so the fact that nature places these immoral limitations on you is what justifies parents in disciplining their children to try and get them to the point where they can succeed in life and not have to go through that suffering that nature is going to impose on them.
Okay. So concerning so we've talked a good bit about like the different analogies we can go into on this. To me, it seems that with you saying that there's an objective morality, there's objective moral standard, but for you it's just undiscovered, and that you can say that it can be either it could be something that's physical or something that's not physical. So by
Would you
that,
like me to expand on that more?
sure.
All right, so there's a theory in physics called emergent spacetime by Nima Akarni-Hammad, who says that space and time can emerge from some more fundamental natural property. I'm going to call that non-physical because it's outside of space and time. And so the super law of nature of whatever's causing morality could be in that spaceless, timeless realm of natural stuff that we haven't discovered yet. So it could be more like a law like gravity that is physical, just a warping of space-time in some way, or it could be a non-physical law that has something to do with prior to space-time interacting. But from my perspective as an atheist, I don't think we have any knowledge about any of those pantheism, theism, deism. We have no idea what the fundamental nature of reality is. Now, I'm willing to grant that there is an objective morality, because I personally believe there is. But whatever that is, we have no way to know what's grounding it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have no reason to know what's grounding the law.
We can't know what's grounding it. We can hypothesize.
Okay, we can hypothesize, but we don't. So in other words, this is really just a theory that you've come into based off of observations you've made in this world, I guess, right?
Well, again, I'm just taking the theist's evidence of moral intuition and moral progress, and I'm saying I'm just going to agree with the theist and say, yep, that qualifies as an objective or evidence of an objective basis. I'm just going to grant that. So I'm just using the theist's evidence here.
Okay, so you're saying the theist's evidence, as in evidence of theism, or evidence that we claim that's out there?
The latter. So theists claim that there is evidence of objective morality, and that evidence is our moral intuitions and our moral progress. So I'm going to agree with the theist and say, yes, that is evidence of objective morality.
Okay, so basically what we see, I guess, like, what is it, like how Ken Ham usually described it, like we're looking at the same evidence, but we're coming at different conclusions based off of our presuppositions? Or how are you...
Sort of, but I'm saying that based off the evidence provided of moral intuition and moral progress, it indicates that is definitely not an all-powerful, all-good being. Because if it was, it would have created a world that didn't have slavery. And based on the Christian definition, it definitely created a world with slavery.
Okay. So if it created...
So I would say that there's better evidence to indicate pantheism than to indicate theism based on objective morality.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if it created slavery, and in your view that this is wrong, and I would agree that slavery would be immoral. Of course, that differs on what you stated earlier, because I disagree that we are currently being in a slavery situation, even by what you had described on how you defined it. Let
me ask you about that, if you don't mind. So would it be morally superior if people who didn't want to live in this fallen world could just choose to go to their own universe? Would that be better or worse?
I don't think that really has any issue in morality based off of my particular worldview. I don't really think a decision like that is based off of any kind of moral ground. To me, that's not a moral question. To me, it would be like a preference of music.
Okay, let me ask you a different question. If a slave had the option to leave slavery and go home, would that be moral better or worse?
If he had to leave slavery to go home.
Yep.
Well, for that, I think it depends on the person, because there's issues where some people prefer that, and others that would just want to go at that point.
Right. I'm only saying it would be better if they had the option to choose to leave.
Right.
So it's better if the slaves would have the option where they can leave if they want to, or stay if they want to. That would be a morally superior state of affairs than if they are forced against their will not to leave.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying, like...
Would you agree?
Yeah. So you're saying that someone who then could choose something, like not as soon as they're born, or the spirit is born or something along those lines, but rather that at some point later on in their life, they're given that ability to, okay, I'm done with this universe, time to move on to another one, or one that actually suits my tastes. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm just going with the slavery analogy here. If someone is a slave right now in the present, it would be morally superior if they had the option to leave than if they don't have the option to leave, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, the same thing applies to us. If we had the option to leave right now, we can go with your analogy and say, if we had the option to leave right now and go to our own universe, that would be morally superior than the fact that we are forced to live here against our will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, I would argue that we would have to do it beforehand. As soon as we were created, we should have the option to pick our own universe. And it would be immoral to force us to live here for any amount of time against our will. But we can just go with your analogy and say, right now, it would be morally superior if those people who didn't want to live here could just leave and go to their own universe.
Okay. Well, I mean, I really still, even after going through all this, I don't see where then this causes a problem for the problem of evil. Because as far as I'm aware, concerned, the problem of evil is about the issue of how do we solve the issue with evil, and it seems to just then go to only focusing on, well, if he was able to create another world or allow us to go to these different universes of which could be fit for us, so like allow us to go to the best of possible worlds, then that would solve it. But then what about other worlds then that would have things that we would consider evil, and they are in existence, and even though we don't live in them, there are people that are going to some of these worlds that exist. What do we make of that?
If they voluntarily choose to go through that, that isn't evil anymore. It's voluntary.
Right. I'm not asking though about them, but say someone else goes to something that you believe is immoral.
I'm not sure I follow. So if I only see it's immoral if you force someone to do something against their will. They can do whatever they want voluntarily, and that's no longer immoral.
Let's say this then. Do you believe that rape and murder is wrong?
Yes.
On an objective basis?
Yes.
And that everyone has this objective moral value basis?
Yes.
And does that exist right now in this world today?
Yes.
Are there rapists and murderers that exist today?
Yes.
For some of these people.
So you're asking if there was a rapist who wanted to go to a world where he could rape, would that be considered? Is that what you're asking? Something like that?
Well, I should ask if you're all knowing then, because you nailed it right there.
All right. So you only have control over yourself and your universe. So you can design your universe any way you want. So if there's a rapist and they want to rape people, they can make it so they have control of their universe and they can force anybody in their universe to do whatever they want. But you can't force anybody else to go into that universe. Every other person would have the voluntary or the option to go to their own universes, and if the option to go to this universe if they so choose. And so they would only be able to go to his universe and be subject to victimization if they so choose to do so. So he can't he can't force anyone to do anything involuntarily. So there would be no immorality.
Okay, but isn't rape what's the definition of rape?
Involuntarily sexual intercourse, something like that. Involuntary.
Right, but you said that they would have to voluntarily go and voluntarily participate in these things, correct?
Right.
Wouldn't that therefore negate it being rape?
Right, exactly. So he couldn't actually rape anybody. He can design the world so he wants to think that, but he can't actually do it. So he can design his own universe however he wants, but he can't force anybody else to go to it. Or he could make, like you mentioned earlier, like artificial intelligences or philosophical zombies that aren't actual people, and he can do whatever he wants to them because they're just like computer video game characters. So that's fine.
So there's limitations. So there's limitations then. Even though for him the best possible world would be somewhere where he can actually act upon the act of rape.
Right, there are definitely limitations. You only have freedom over yourself and your universe. You have voluntarily control over yourself. You don't have voluntarily control over everybody else. So you don't have total freedom or all powerful. You're not all powerful. You only have freedom over yourself and your universe, and no one can involuntarily force you to do anything you don't consent to doing. That applies to everyone. So you're not all powerful. There are definitely limitations.
Okay, so in other words, God's not the one that's creating this universe. It's the human individuals themselves that he's allowing to create the best of possible universes.
Either one is possible. God could create it for you. You could say, I'd just like my universe like this, put it in like an order at McDonald's, like print the universe.
Okay, then. So, if that's the case, so then we would obviously see what the problem would be then if he's not allowed to then, do something like that, to create anything as to what you were trying to point out to that the person wanted to occur. But then also at the same time, your problem was that the person didn't have the choice. But now you're saying that there are some things he doesn't have a choice over, which seems to conflict with what your problem was earlier.
No, you only have freedom over yourself and your universe. You don't have total freedom over other people. That would be a contradiction. So if you tried to impose your will on other people, that would be the definition of immorality based on how I've described it. So I don't see the contradiction you're trying to outline here. Like there's no total freedom.
I'm not necessarily saying there's a contradiction. I'm just trying to understand that you obviously have to see where there's, based on what your whole thing is, it seems to be about freedom of allowing certain things to occur. But
freedom
there's a limitation.
from involuntary imposition. So it's freedom from involuntary imposition.
Okay, so that's the actual thing about freedom, that there's still a limitation regarding that freedom.
Right. It only applies to yourself and your universe.
Okay, but I could still say the same thing within that there's the limitation of our freedom about, us being stuck with this universe. Should be something that's justifiable.
What do you mean? You're not stuck with the universe. You can destroy it if you want. You can go visit other people's universes if they allow you to.
I'm talking about the reality that we're in now, where we're just limited to just this universe. The one that you say is not the best of possible worlds.
Right. What about it?
Well, like the issue with this one guy that you're saying that he can't do certain things, but by the time that happens, then he's like, well, this ain't the best possible world, because if it is, then I would be able to act upon the action of rape. And so because we don't have the action to go to the best possible world that we want, therefore then
it's not the best possible world we want. It's not about what we want. The objective moral standard is indicated by our moral intuition or moral progress. That is a world without involuntary imposition of will, where one person cannot force another to do anything they don't voluntarily consent to. That is the objective moral standard. You can design your universe however you want, but that's not what's moral. What's moral is the fact that you can't force anybody else to do anything they don't consent to doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what we will do is I'll give you a 2-minute warning, and then we will start the Q&A if you guys have any last questions you want to go over.
Well, at this point, I think I've asked enough. So unless TJump wants to ask me anything, because I think I've been doing most of the interrogation at this point.
Well, I mean, I'd still like to know, would it be better? Just imagine if it's possible. Would it be better if God gave every individual the option to go to their own universe, and if they wanted to, they could come to this universe of suffering and pain, but if they didn't want to, they could just choose to go to their own? Would that be a morally superior world?
In my understanding of things, and based on how I'm feeling, to me, yes. But the issue is that I therefore don't say that therefore God is wrong in just allowing things as they are today, because I'm also finite in my knowledge and I don't know what happens in the future, that therefore is a justifiable position for God to do what he's doing. Just like there are times that I wasn't aware of things that my parents were doing, and I thought that, oh, you're an evil, idiotic person, until I grow up later and start gaining knowledge and wisdom, that I learned that what they did in helping raise me was absolutely justifiable.
All right, that's it for me. Thanks for your answer.
No problem.
You got it. So excited to move into the Q&A, as we got a number of questions here, good questions that I'm pumped to read. And if this is your first time here, highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button, as we have a lot more debates coming up. In fact, we hope to have the gentleman that we have on right now back in the future. So as well as tonight, we've got a double header. We've got a debate on creation evolution right after this one. So the questions. Karag, forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, Karag. Korag Nightwolf asks, if we are fallible beings, how could we ever assess a source to determine whether it's fallible or infallible, like a god or scripture? So I think this would be for RC, but might also be for Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll take a shot at answering. It's definitely possible. Even if we're fallible beings, that means it's still potentially possible that we could find some kind of methodology to indicate an infallible or ultimate source. But as far as I know, we don't have any such methodology yet.
Mm-hmm. So, from what I'm looking at, the question, if we are fallible beings, how could we ever assess a source to determine whether it's fallible or infallible? I mean, as far as if we're fallible beings, how could we assess a source? I think the issue, I mean, sorry, playing dumb here, but I'm not too familiar. It's been a while since I've heard the word assess or looked it up in the dictionary as much. But as far as a source, I mean, I think that was revealed via the word that which an infallible God is left that to us, and we have read that and be able to know it, as well as also our own conscience sees creation, and we understand that there is an infallible God that exists, and if that is where we all have that knowledge, then I'm pretty sure looking at, for example, the scriptures that point out the issue about the law, as well as the fact that of our conscience that has that written law in our hearts, that conscience of automatically knowing right and wrong, that, you know, that would be our point. That's how we would know.
You got it. So, next question. Thank you, gentlemen, for your answers. John Peterson asks, for the theist, if God created everything if God created everything, then he created evil. Therefore, how can God be anything but immoral, because he's responsible for every evil act? And he'd like Tom's take on this too.
Okay. Well, for me, with God creating evil, just because he creates evil doesn't automatically mean, in certain instances, as we see that there is Isaiah 53, which uses the word, but it doesn't mean like every other kind of evil. It uses a word that means of natural evil. So in other words, like hurricanes, like the fires that happen in California, earthquakes, these kinds of things that we know do take tons of lives. So we could consider that an evil. But even with that, that just because that God creates these evils doesn't automatically mean that therefore that means he's immoral, because then you must provide the standard of why that is immoral in the first place. And I don't know what this person's moral framework is, whether he's affirming a objective or a subjective view, but he has to provide some sort of basis for that in order for him to do that. He has to, of course, presuppose that God exists. Now, if he's immoral or not, the issue is that God has established what is right and wrong, and with everything that occurs, we agree that there's some sort of evil that exists, and there can probably be things, for example, like he's mentioned, like with slavery in Genesis. Joseph being sold into slavery, there was a justifiable means for that to help prevent the loss of life. There are times when we even see, like the death of Jesus, a evil that is able to be justifiable. For this particular case, the redemption and salvation of people.
Gotcha. And then Tom, yes, for your take as well.
All right, I'll play the devil's advocate here. I'd say that as a theist, if I was a theist, I'd say that creating evil isn't itself evil. You would have to actually impose the evil on someone for it to be evil. So the fact that he created it wouldn't necessarily make God evil.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. You bet. Thanks, gentlemen. Next, we have Genius Tracks, who asks, this is would be to ask Tom if intuitions make something like morals empirically true. I think Genius Tracks is
absolutely
asking.
not. No, not even a little bit. I'm just granting the theist argument for the sake of argument. It does not. Moral intuition and moral progress is just something in our head. It's just conceptual. There's no reason to believe it is actually an objective thing in the world from that line of argumentation. I just granted that in this debate for the sake of argument.
Gotcha. You bet. And S.J. Thomason, good to see you here again, S.J. What grounds the objective moral standard of Tom? So thank you for that question, S.J. And Tom, obviously this one's just for you.
I wrote a model of objective morality. It's on my YouTube channel. I define objective a little bit differently than theists do. I think it can be objective based on if there is a kind of like a Platonic perfect form. And so I take a more of a Platonic approach to what objective morality qualifies as, rather than grounded in some kind of a theism. But pantheism would be another option if you want that kind of a grounding. So I just say my morality could be grounded in more philosophical definition of objectivity, or it can be grounded in pantheism if you want that kind of metaphysical grounding.
You got it. Well, thank you very much for that. And with that, excellent questions, everybody. The whole gang, thank you very much, and glad to have you back. And if it's your first time here, glad you're here too. No matter what your worldview is, we encourage you, check out the guys in the description. Their links are there. You can say, hey, if you agree with them already, well, then you got somebody that you already would probably be interested in reading. And if you don't agree, well, you can at least understand them in the most charitable way possible. So with that, we want to say thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, and then we can get the debaters' ideas and questions and what you heard out to more people out there. So with that, I want to say we will have our next debate with our doubleheader tonight, and so stick around for that. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thanks for stopping by, and most of all, thanks for the debaters, because they're getting in the hot seat, they're doing the studying, they're doing, like, I can't believe, like, I just am amazed at how much the debaters prepare and come to play ball. So I'm just thankful for the debaters, because they're what makes the show. And so check out their channels. Thank you very much, RC and Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So with that, keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable, folks. And with that, we will see you later. Have a good night.